The Gothic revival in the Victorian times took medieval architecture as its inspiration to create a new form of what is now called modern Gothic. Of course, original Gothic building is nearly all ecclesiastical, and this is really one of the first domestic buildings within the modern Gothic form. The Gothic revival took medieval architecture as its inspiration to create a form of Gothic modernism. And of course, most surviving medieval buildings are ecclesiastical. And this is one of the first domestic buildings within this new Gothic modernism. The influential figures here, of course, Augustus Welby Pugin, the architect, best known actually today for the interior design of the Houses of Parliament. And the other main influence on William Morris and Philip Webb was the critic John Ruskin, who was in fact a friend of theirs and had written very persuasively in favour of Gothic modernism and against all things neoclassical. Architecture and social harmony were linked in their minds, even though Victorian Gothic is in fact merely a style.
But where has my love gone, with his cheeks like roses, and his best black billycock on, all decked with primroses? I fear the scorching sun.
And this is an example of the things that are still being discovered at Red House, the original decoration. This is a painted wall inside a later cupboard, and as you can see it's been very much damaged by later shelving and so on, and it's actually very difficult to read it. We think it's possibly painted by Elizabeth Siddal, that was Rossetti's wife, because it very much looks like her style of drawing. And now we're entering the great first floor drawing room, one of the wonderful spaces of the house. You must realise that all the white painting is of course 20th century. Originally this would all have been patterned and coloured. And there's a great open ceiling which was originally covered with all kinds of patterning, a fragment of which survives. And then here is one of the great features of this room, the huge brick fireplace, of course inspired by medieval examples, but not in the least bit derived from them, and with the motto above, Ars longa, vita brevis, art survives but life is transient. And then we come to see one of the surviving panels painted by Burne-Jones on the walls of the drawing room, the scene from the romance of Sir d'Agrevant and Lady Melidor, where we have a kind of image of the feasting and entertaining that went on in Red House, cast in medieval guise, because that's the whole ambience of this house. And as you see, the rich colours and the decorative patterning in the painting. And at the top of the painting, you see William Morris and Janie Morris as presiding over the feast. And then below the dado, and behind this panelling, which was inserted after Morris's time, the most thrilling discovery at Red House to date is the fact that if you open the panelling, you find a painted frieze that would have run all the way along the bottom part of the wall, painted by Morris himself, and probably one of the very earliest pieces of decoration in the house. It has bands of colour and then these stylised flowers with the motto here, Qui bien aime tard oublie, who loves longest loves best.
You know that my life is yours and yours is mine.
And then this is the window alcove where the women of the house and their guests would sit to do the needlework and the embroidery, with the light coming, as much light as possible, especially on dark afternoons. William Morris, who later became famous as a poet and a designer, whose wallpapers and fabrics are still popular today, was a wealthy young man who at Oxford met up with a group of like-minded young men whose ambition was to transform the world through art and literature. The most important and lifelong of Morris's early friends was Ned Jones, the artist who later became famous as Sir Edward Burne-Jones. And Morris and his friends then moved to London and became friendly with members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. The PRB was a group of slightly older artists who had startled the world with their paintings in the early 1850s by juxtaposing religious subjects with a very modern life presentation. And the most famous of them were the three great artists of the 19th century, Sir John Everett Millais, who painted the great Ophelia, the drowning Ophelia that's now in the Tate Gallery, William Holman Hunt, the creator of The Light of the World, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who was a poet and a painter. And these older men welcomed Morris and his companions into their social circle, sort of younger brothers of this movement. In 1858, William Morris married Jane Burden, aged 19, who was tall, stately, dark-haired, but from a very poverty-stricken background. Her father was a stableman and her mother was a washerwoman. And they needed somewhere to live after they were married. And for William Morris, for whom money was no object and the whole of the modern world was too ugly for his taste, the obvious thing was to build himself the perfect house for himself, his wife, and the family to be. And so he found this spot. He looked around within reach of London, but right out in the country, and he found this spot in Bexley. And so you must imagine this site, which is now surrounded by suburban building, as completely encircled by orchards, with the blossom starting in February, the different fruit trees, right through to the apple and the cherry trees in May. It was filled with young couples and their first little children coming along too. And so we can imagine the women sitting in this alcove with their embroidery and making these great wall hangings that were decorating the rest of the house, and looking out into the garden where Morris had created a bowling alley, an old-fashioned kind of rather like a boule court. And so the men would be outside playing bowls. And we must think of them all as being very young and in their 20s. And so they were quite boisterous. And so there are stories about hide and seek in the dark in the house and fights with the windfall apples, just like kind of snowball fights in the autumn. In the dining room with the great dark red dresser designed by Philip Webb, one of the fitted pieces of furniture to remain in the house. And of course, almost as soon as the house was occupied, Morris's ideas were flowing forward, and his notion of establishing a firm to produce furniture and furnishings and stained glass came into being. So this is the birthplace of the company that later became Morris and Company and produced, and where designs are still being produced today. And in a way, the birthplace too of the arts and crafts movement, although in effect that was a generation later when people took up, individual craftspeople, craftsmen and women took up Morris's ideas about the designer and the maker of a piece being the same person. And that is the beginnings of the fine crafts as we know them today. And one of the latest discoveries at Red House, which took place when during rewiring last winter, was an actual original letter from 1864 from Philip Webb to William Morris. And this is a facsimile of the letter, and if you can imagine, it was found underneath the floorboards, folded up and inside the original envelope. And as you can see from the foldings and discolouring, the size and shape of this original letter. This is a facsimile. And it talks about all the people in the circle, Ned Jones, Janie Morris, Maddox Brown, Charlie Faulkner, the whole group of those who were Morris's friends and associates in Red House. And it kind of transports us right back to the original life here in Red House. Sadly, Morris was ill in bed at the time, and that's how we think that the letter was stuffed back in the envelope and dropped on the floor and went down between the floorboards. And then, so excitingly, a volunteer archaeologist, when they were sort of examining all the fabric of the house to see what remained under the floorboards, how could you come up with something as exciting as that? And the letter indirectly reveals why, after so very few years here, the Morrises were obliged to leave Red House. The business Morris and Company was located in Holborn, and it was already a very long and arduous commute for Morris. And then when he was sick in bed, he was unable to attend to the management of the company. And so in 1865, with very heavy hearts, one imagines, the Morrises returned to noisy, smoky central London and left Red House forever, and they never came back.
Oh, I wish them both great joy.